Mandela, you wanted to be a bigger person.
Nelson Mandela.
Mr. Mandela.
Remember Nelson Mandela.
Third, Nelson Mandela.
Mandela.
Nelson 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 Mandela hat.
Today, if you look around on the internet, you are going to see a lot of pictures in which Western leaders are embracing, kissing, and smiling with Nelson Mandela. If you have some time to listen to their speeches, you are going to hear them talk about how great that man was.
It is a great pleasure, a sincere pleasure for Barbara and me to welcome to the White House Mr. and Mrs. Mandela. Mr. Mandela, a man who embodies the hopes of millions.
Nelson Mandela's message of peace was rooted in the conviction that we are all part of the same community.
And how he was an hero.
Nelson Mandela, one of the brightest lights of our world, was not just a hero of our time, but a hero of all time.
Time Nelson Mandela walks into a room, we all feel a little bigger. We all want to stand up. We all want to cheer because we'd like to be him on our best day.
This is the incredible thing about Mandela. When he prevailed, he did not show any kind of vindictiveness towards those who had treated him so badly.
Nelson Mandela was one of the great figures of Africa, arguably one of the great figures of the last century.
But guess what? Just a few years ago, Mandela was considered a terrorist by the US, UK, and most of the Western world.
Then Congressman Dick Cheney voted against the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act in 1986.
Mandela is a communist terrorist.
When Margaret Thatcher came to power in several years through her premiership, she called Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress, the AN's, a typical terrorist organization.
In fact, Mandela's name was added to the list of the world's most notorious terrorists until he was 90 years old. Which means even after he left the prison, even when he became the president of South Africa, even after his tenure as the president of South Africa, Mandela was still not allowed to walk in or travel into the United States except he applied for some special waiver.
The U.S. State Department has Nelson Mandela on a terrorist list. So when he tries to apply to come to the U.S. for a visa, they say, I don't know, you're kind of shaky.
This is what the Time magazine wrote about that incident. Even after the apartheid regime came to an end and Mandela was elected president in the early 1990s, Mandela, a member of the African National Congress, still had to apply for permission to enter the United States. The question I want to try and answer in this video is, why did United States add the name of Mandela to the list of the world's most notorious terrorists? And if you have answer to that, the next question will be, why did they keep him on that list until he was 90? On page 12 of this book, which is Autobiography of Nelson Mandela, written by him, he wrote about his childhood and how, when he was a young boy, he usually admired white men and he believed, in fact, that they were not ordinary humans. On page 12, you read about how he wrote that he thought white people should be treated with a mixture of fear and respect because, yeah, of course, they are not ordinary humans. That was the environment Mandela grew in, an environment that admired and somewhat feared the white man. However, this perception Mandela had of the white man started changing in his youth. For example, also in this book, he wrote about how one of the chiefs in his village, Chief Meligqili, I probably did not pronounce that right, was talking, dirty things about white men. And Mandela felt like, yeah, the reason why that chief is saying bad things about white men is because he's an ignorant. Because white men are our benefactor. They came to Africa with schools, they came with hospitals, they bring us some gifts. Why will anybody in the world think these people are bad people? However, even though Mandela did not agree with this chief, he confessed on page 30 of this book that somehow the opinion of this chief altered the way he looked at a white man. So let me quote from page 30 of this book. He wrote, "But without exactly understanding why, his words soon began to work in me." And that was how Mandela started to become suspicious about the white men. At the age of 19, that was 1937, Mandela got admission to a college, Eton College. Now, in this college, which was obviously run by white men, every white man must be respected, sometimes worshipped. And towards the end of his term, in the college, something happened which was going to be the final straw for Mandela's career, and that is the school invited an African poet. The name of that poet is Samuel Edward Croonen. Again, I probably did not pronounce that right. Anyway, when this poet was coming into their college, the very first thing that surprised Mandela was that this poet entered the hall through the same door that no black man or black person was allowed to enter the hall. The second thing this poet would do, which surprised Mandela, was that he started attacking white men right in a hall where white men were sitting down. On page 40 of this book, Mandela wrote, "I could hardly believe my ear. His boldness in speaking of such delicate matters in the presence of Dr. Wellington and other whites seemed utterly astonishing to us. Yet, at the same time, it aroused and motivated us and began to alter my perception of men like Dr. Wellington, whom I had automatically considered my benefactor." As this black poet was about to round off his speech, he declared that for Africans to take back everything the white men had stolen from them, there had to be a war. And on page 42 of this book, Mandela wrote, "When he spoke this last word, he dropped his head to his chest. We rose to our feet, clapping and cheering. I did not want ever to stop applauding. I felt such intense pride. At that point, I felt like one of the chosen people." Starting from this point in Mandela's life, he was going to start looking at the white man from a very different eye. In 1943, the 25-year-old Mandela met Anton Lambede, who happened to be an ANC member. The following year, Mandela became an ANC member, and the ANC, African National Congress, was having simple objective. The objective was to create a level playing ground and have political inclusiveness for the black, and stop everything that comes with racism in the whole South African. And these guys were going about fighting for what they believe in, actually without violence. They will organize strike, organize boycotts, organize protests. But the more they go out for protests, the more black people were killed by the white policemen. And the more they tried to organize boycott and strike, the more the apartheid regime created funny legislation just to put the leader of ANC into prison. By 1955, Mandela had concluded that non-violence resistance is simply not going to work against the kind of the enemy they had to resist. And on page 166 of this book, he wrote about how he came to that conclusion, which I will read for you in a moment. He wrote, "A freedom fighter learns the hard way that it is the oppressor who divines the nature of the struggle, and the oppressed is often left no recourse but to use methods that mirror those of the oppressor. At a certain point, one can only fight fire with fire." On page 159 of his autobiography, which I did not want to read from again because now it seems this entire video is about reading from some book. Nelson Mandela told the story of how he sent one of the ANC member, Walter Sisulu, to China to go and speak with the leader of China and get some weapons from the Chinese government. The next thing Mandela would do was to start reading books on guerrilla warfare. And after then, he traveled to Ethiopia to go and undergo training on how to lead a guerrilla warfare. On December 16th, 1961, ANC declared their readiness to now be violent by exploding 57 bombs in a single day. They followed that up on the new year of 1962, and starting from there, it was non-stop. According to this 2003 report by TRC, between 1961 and 1963, about 190 attacks were recorded from the ANC. A total of 71 people died in similar attacks between 1976 and 1984. If you have time to go through this page, which I know you shouldn't have time for, you can see detailed record of different attacks and their numbers from the ANC, starting from 1961 till 1988, when they were declared a terrorist group. Of course, in this story, I have omitted how Mandela was arrested and how he was put in prison for 5 years and how he was tried again and then put in prison for life, because I think or assume that you already know that story. Anyway, you now have the background into how Mandela became a terrorist. By 1988, the South African government had declared ANC a terror organization, and the following year, American government added Mandela and his group into the list of the world's most notorious terror group. But this is not because of what you think or what I have told you just now. Instead, it is because of something else, which is going to be where we round up this video. Of course, on the face of it, if you make a list of all the crimes of Mandela, bombing different locations in South Africa, you can say, yeah, that is the reason why he was considered a terrorist. But if you think about it from another perspective, then you will understand that really, United States does not consider anybody a terrorist because of what they do. People become a terrorist in the eyes of the US, UK, and a few other Western evil countries because of where they belong, not necessarily because of what they do. A good example of that is, think about Israel. Now, Israel is a terror country, I'm sorry, because For the past 70 years, they have been terrorizing their neighbor, Palestine. But they are still good friends of the United States till tomorrow morning. Think about the king of Saudi. If you are the king of Saudi, it doesn't matter how many people you kill in your territory, you belong to the bloc, the political bloc of America. You are an ally, so you can never be tagged any ugly name.
A terrorist is what we label a terrorist. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what they actually do, or who's killing civilians and who's not killing civilians. When we, what do we call collateral damage, and what do we call, killing the innocents? No, it's whoever we decide is our enemy, we put them on the terrorist list, and whoever we decide is our ally, we put on the good guys list. And from time to time that changes. And we had the white apartheid racist government of South Africa on the good guys list, and we had the heroic resistance to that government on the terrorist list.
If you are the prince of Dubai, it doesn't matter how much you do not respect the rule of law. You get the idea. The real reason why Mandela was added to the list of the most notorious terrorists was because he aligned himself with China and Soviet Union, which he himself confessed in this book, taking weapons from China, taking weapons from Soviet Union. That simply pulled him at the opposite side of the US, and that was the original crime he committed.
And now they're taking up arms.
The author of this book, Robert Trent Finson, that is Dreams of African American Liberation in Segregationalist South Africa, put it this way: Mandela was viewed as a person on the wrong side of the Cold War, and that was the only or the biggest crime, being on the wrong side to the powers that rule the world, that is America and the rest of the Western world, was the primary crime of the US, because attacking the evil apartheid regime would not have been enough a crime, because even some American senators believed that that was the right thing to do.
What disturbs me more than the policy that you call a policy is the rationale for the policy. The rationale for the policy. You set out 4 principles that you adhere to, and then and I will go over them in a moment. Then you say on page 14, we must not become part of South Africa's problem. We must remain part of their solution. We must not aim to impose ourselves, our solutions, our favorites in South Africa. Damn it, we have favorites in South Africa. The favorites in South Africa are the people who are being repressed by that ugly white regime. We have favorites. Our loyalty is not to South Africa, it's to South Africans. And the South Africans are majority black, and they are being excoriated. It is not to some stupid puppet government over there. It is not to the Afrikaners regime. We have no loyalty to them. We have no loyalty to South Africa, to South Africans. And the fact of the matter is I listen to this rationale first of all. It is the leaders of South Africa and their people, black and white, who have the majority responsibility. They must rise to it. Well, they are rising to it. They're rising to it. The only thing left available to do with that repulsive, repugnant regime of Afrikaners there. And it's the only way they have. They've tried everything for the last 20 years. They begged, they borrowed, they crawled, and now they're taking up arms.